Hey everybody, welcome into the back room. I'm Andy Ostroy. Oh boy, oh boy, oh boy, oh boy!
We arrived at this trial and ultimately today at this verdict in the same manner as every other case that comes through the courtroom doors, by following the facts and the law and doing so without fear or favor. Many voices out there. The only voice that matters is the voice of the jury, and the jury has spoken.
That, of course, was Manhattan DA Alvin Bragg talking about his monumental victory in court yesterday when the verdict came back from the jury. Unanimous, Donald Trump guilty on all 34 counts. We will be talking about all of that shortly with CNN legal analyst Jennifer Rodgers. She's going to help unpack the critical events of the week, including and especially the verdict and what comes next. But first, thank you for tuning in today. We appreciate you listening, and we'd love to hear your comments. So email us at backroomandy@gmail.com and or post on our social media, and we'll read some feedback next time. And if you like the podcast, please follow or subscribe and rate and review, and you'll be notified every time we post a new episode. So let's get to our two big things, the first of which is Trump. A great day, conviction, guilty, all 34 counts. I am in the studio with Maddie Rosenberg, and we have Jen. I am always in a great mood. Remotely, driving somewhere in these great United States.
Well, I couldn't miss it. How could I miss this momentous occasion with my men?
Yeah, it's a great day. It's a great day, although some people think it's a sad, somber day. I don't agree with that. I think it's a great day. Our system held, our rule of law held, the Constitution was upheld. Donald Trump is finally being held accountable legally in a criminal court. Hopefully it's the first of many dominoes eventually. And that's a good day. It's a good day when America and Americans win. So did you guys think that was going to happen? What were you feeling when this verdict was announced?
Couldn't believe it. I'm in shock. I was so giddy. I didn't even know what to do with myself. I was laughing. I was like dancing. People thought I was nuts, but like I just could not contain my excitement and exuberance.
Yeah, I was definitely happy that it happened. Once I heard it wasn't a hung jury, which is what I actually had guessed it would be, I did think he would be found guilty. I didn't know all 34 counts. I mean, predicting a jury is pretty difficult to do, but obviously it showed that no one's above the law and all the other things that we wanted it to show. I wasn't ecstatic about it. I mean, I'm happy it happened, but I'm still very cautious about what it means in terms of the reaction from the right.
I never felt that this wasn't going to happen. I've been saying for a long time now that he's going to be a convicted felon by the end of May or early June. And I do think that the rest of the cases are going to go in a similar way. I think the process is ugly. The process is frustrating. The process has been taking an inordinately large amount of time, but I do think the system works, and I still believe in that system. I believed in it when the courts ruled 60 plus times against him when he filed all his lawsuits after the election, and I believe that the system is going to do exactly what it should be doing, and we saw that yesterday from the ability of a jury to put aside its own political opinions. I mean, there were people on that jury that literally said during jury selection that I get my news from Fox and Truth Social. But I guess when you sit in a courtroom for 6 weeks and you hear and you see that evidence, I would imagine it's not easy not to be objective. And when people say, yeah, I could be objective, put me on this jury, I think they mean it. And I think, that's a good sign that he was convicted by a jury that was able to be objective.
Yes, I think that's true. And it's also true that the defense did a pretty poor job of giving an alternative narrative as to, whether we would agree with the alternative narrative. But if you look at something like the OJ trial, there were many alternative narratives in the hopes of finding a hung jury by one person grabbing onto the fact that gloves didn't fit, one person grabbing onto the fact that Mark Fuhrman was a racist, or, you can go down the list. And, why Blanche didn't do that? Yeah, I mean, I expected to hear a lot more crazy coming from Blanche, and I didn't. And I can only assume it had something to do with his client. I don't know, but I do think it's going to give grounds for Trump to have an appeal on incompetent representation.
Well, he did try to discredit Cohen. That didn't work. He went way far on discrediting Stormy Daniels. That didn't work. I think it was hard. You had Trump in his own voice. Okay, so they heard tapes of that. They had Michael Cohen, who turned out to be a devastating and highly corroborated witness. You had the debacle with Bob Costello at the end.
That was horrible.
You had David Pecker. You had the accountants, the bookkeepers. The evidence was overwhelming. Blanche this was his first trial as a defense attorney. He's a former prosecutor. So yeah, totally inexperienced. But I don't think he had much room to do much more,
Also, you have to give credit to the prosecution. They had 19 other witnesses or 18 other witnesses besides Cohen. Most of them they were friendly towards Trump. And in addition, was it the assistant district attorney Steinglass who did a devastating analysis in his closing with the dramatic 45-second talk about how he could have very easily talked about the 14-year-old stalking him and also the call about the hush money.
Yeah, I think the prosecution did a really good job, but I think the defense did a really poor job. If Tacopino hadn't gotten off the case, Tacopino probably having been a defense counsel in a state court many, many, many times, getting mob people off who had plenty of evidence against them, they had a terrible defense, and it was a good prosecution.
The question is, though, that given the evidence, that wasn't going to change. To Jen's point, the prosecution did a fantastic job. So to your point, the only thing that could have been missing was the ability to do an even better job at the spaghetti defense, okay? We're just throwing up shit up on the wall and hopefully something sticks. I'm still not sure that with an educated jury that would have mattered. But it'll be fascinating to hear the process once these people start talking.
Yeah, I really do hope for their sake that they do not talk for a very, very long time.
Apparently, Trump was glaring at them one by one after that verdict was read. He literally, because you can't readily see all the jury from where you're sitting on the defense table. He literally had to strain his neck and look around and looked at each one of those people like John Gotti would, It was just a crazy week. Like, I went down to the courthouse every day, and just ever since this trial began, there's been nobody down there. I mean, literally like 8 people, 9 people, 10 people. I was outside the courthouse on Tuesday. It was the first day of summation. That's when the defense started. I spoke with a lot of Trump supporters. There was a guy with a ginormous red MAGA hat. I almost got into a fist fight with another guy who got in my face. Went back to the courthouse on Wednesday. That was the first day of deliberation. Literally pro-Biden / anti-Trump people were getting physically attacked. And this was happening throughout the week. Like, you can't walk into that park carrying a sign that says, Trump should be convicted. I mean, it was like a swarm. And cops literally had to go in, rescue people, and escort them out of the park. But, the good thing was it was only, like I said, a handful of people. And I asked one guy in particular, why aren't there any other people here? And he said, well, he packed them in the Bronx, didn't he? And I was like, well, that's a rally. And he goes, well, we Trumpers, we like to see him in person. And that reinforced something I've been saying for a long time, which is they're there for the Jerry Springer show. Without the Jerry Springer show, without Jerry Springer making the jokes, mocking disabled people and all that, why would they be there? So why would they go stand outside a courthouse just to stand there? And so I took away from that whole thing that it's a good sign that he wasn't really getting hundreds or thousands of people down there. I was at the courthouse again yesterday. Ran into my friend Alexandra Pelosi. We chatted for a bit. That was a lot of fun, comparing notes and talking shop. Again, more Trump people were attacking Biden people. It was really vicious yesterday, because I guess maybe emotions were heightened because people were expecting a verdict. And I left a little bit before the verdict came down. But I want to play a clip of one guy. This was the ginormous red MAGA hat guy.
If Donald Trump shot somebody on Fifth Avenue, I would still vote for him. He said it. I agree with him.
Right. And why is that?
Because this country is in such bad shape. Maybe someone has to go down to fix this country. Just like, the people went down in the Revolutionary War to fix the country, right? Sometimes people have to get hurt to fix countries. That's how empires rise and fall.
That should be like one of his campaign ads. Like, sometimes people have to get hurt. And I'm just the guy to do it.
I feel like he's basically said that a lot.
This guy, but, here's the thing. Like, we've been hearing Trumpers for years. But I have to say, over these past 6 weeks, there is something different when you literally stand with them and try to have a conversation with them. Because you're doing that in real time. It's not like a clip you hear on CNN or MSNBC. You get to do follow-up. But like every conversation with them it's like you're talking to a crazy person.
Well, I was going to say, you sent us a bunch of clips while you were down there, and the one that you chose was the sanest of all the ones that you shared, because that was crazy town, Andy. I was a little concerned for your safety.
Interestingly, Google searches up 3,233% right after the verdict was announced versus an hour before. What does this mean? Maybe nothing, but it certainly shows that Americans are engaged.
Google searches for what?
Trump and verdict.
Okay.
Which this brings us to our other subject, which is the election. NPR came out with a poll yesterday reinforcing that at least 11% or more of moderate Republicans and independents say they cannot vote for Donald Trump if he's a convicted felon. And when you consider the fact that the election is probably going to be won anywhere from 1 to 4 points, that's significant. You guys know my feeling on polls. I don't really trust polls, but there's something about this one in particular because of the specificity of the question. So I don't see that changing in 2 months. I don't see that changing in 3 months, especially coming from a moderate or an independent. But again, I don't trust polls in particular. But if that's truly the case and that's what happens, that could be the nail in the coffin for him. The big question is how and when and to what degree is Biden going to use this? You have an opponent who is now a convicted felon. So this isn't time for like when they go low, we go high. This is pound this into every American between now and the election. So much is going to depend not just on this trial, but there will likely be other trials or trial that starts at least before the election. We have no idea what Trump's going to do. He's speaking today. He shows no remorse. He's threatening more violence. So what we can almost guarantee is that between now and the election, he is going to be his own worst enemy and our best employee.
I also do think that this gives even more power to any third-party candidate that's on the ballot, because you have a lot of people who are going to be a pox on both their houses. They weren't happy with Biden for whatever reason, and now they're like, oh, they're both so terrible. If there's a third option, they're just going to vote for whatever that option is.
Kennedy's campaign, there's a very real possibility that his campaign can implode. I mean, look, we're sitting here, it's almost June. He's still not on any more than like 3 or 4 ballots. So, he could talk a lot about how he's going to be on all of them, but it ain't happening yet. And what's happening so far, it's not that great for him.
For sure, but
that's not even talking about the controversies.
But he is on one of the 7 battleground states ballots. And so if he gets on 3 of those battleground states, his impact will be profound.
His impact could be profound. We don't know. It could be. We don't know. So much can happen between now and then. Not surprisingly, the GOP reaction has been off the charts, up Trump's ass.
This is a justice system that hunts Republicans while protecting Democrats. This was certainly a hoax, a sham. This was devastating for the average American watching.
It is shameful to see this, and I hope Americans are paying attention, because America, they think you are stupid.
What we saw today was an absolute travesty of justice.
This was not law. This was not criminal justice. This was politics. This was a political smear job. This was an attack job. This is what you see in banana republics. And it is, I am both furious and heartbroken at the same time.
This is the quintessential show trial. This is what you see in communist countries. This is what I grew up having people in this community tell me about. It happened in the days after the Castro Revolution. Obviously, those led to executions. This, on the other hand, is an effort to interfere in an election.
That last person was Marco Rubio, whose family escaped the persecution in Cuba of the Castro dictatorship. He, more than anyone, knows that what happened yesterday was what happens in a democracy. But it's not shocking that these people are they're still supporting this guy. They are jumping on the crazy car as it's about to drive off the cliff. That's, to me, the biggest phenomenon of the last 9 years, is that they cannot get off the pipe.
Well, he still has a really good chance of winning, and Marco Rubio is apparently leading in the VP pack. And, that's what you have to do. It's shocking, but I guess isn't really after 9 years.
And Larry Hogan, who's running for senator, who actually has a good chance of being the senator from Maryland, all he did was come out and say, hey, a jury of his peers decided this case, and we should respect that. We live in a country that operates on the rule of law, and we should respect that. And he is getting attacked. Trump's campaign manager said, you just lost your campaign, which is not atypical because these people shoot themselves in the feet all the time. So they'll probably take a seat that could have been held by a Republican and watch a Democrat take that seat. All right, let's get to our winners and losers.
My winner, Democrat Party leaders for figuring out a workaround to the Ohio glitch that threatened to keep Biden off the November Ohio ballot. My loser, will a Trump conviction really matter? Republican mega donors from Silicon Valley and Wall Street poured money into Trump's re-election campaign after yesterday's verdict.
Well, it's hard not to have Alvin Bragg be my winner because he won this case, and that's my winner for obvious reasons. It's also hard not to say that the biggest loser has to be Donald Trump because he lost the case in 34 felony convictions.
My winner, the jury in the Trump trial, who demonstrated objectivity and courage in a critical moment in American history. My loser, get ready, kids, drum roll, because this is a shocker. Donald Trump, a shameless serial criminal who's finally being held accountable. All right, that gets us to the weekly rant. And I want to speak to the Trump supporters for a second. Jan, how many do we have out there right now?
We actually have 7.
7 Trump supporters listening. All right, So this is for you, kids. I know you're angry. I know you feel like the system failed you. That this case, this trial, was nothing but a political witch hunt and rigged from the get-go. That the person you consider your president is the victim of a vast conspiracy to bring him down in an election year. A vast conspiracy so large and powerful and led by President Joe Biden himself, and which includes moderate Republicans, independents, Democrats, the media, the courts, attorneys general, district attorneys, prosecutors, his former aides, his former cabinet members, Republican secretaries of state and election officials, and now a jury of both Democrats and Republicans, including those who say they get their news from Fox and Truth Social. Of course, such a vast conspiracy like this would be impossible to pull together. It would literally have to include everyone who has any measure of power, no matter their political persuasion. Just think for a second. If Biden and Democrats had this kind of power, wouldn't so many things be different? Wouldn't all the other things they want be happening as well? Wouldn't all of Trump's other trials be happening before the election, which is what Biden and Democrats want? Wouldn't Biden be 10 plus points ahead in the polls instead of being tied or trailing Trump? Wouldn't Democrats have won the House in 2022 instead of losing by just 4 seats? Wouldn't abortion still be legal? I could go on. Biden had nothing to do with the New York election interference / hush money trial. There was no weaponization of the DOJ. This was a state-run investigation and prosecution. Manhattan DA Alvin Bragg's office was not a tool of Biden and the American government, and it certainly wasn't funded by George Soros. The jury was not a collection of Democrat plants. During jury selection, these honorable 12 people, plus 6 alternates, who made great sacrifices by putting their lives, work, and family on hold for 6 weeks, swore to be fair and objective. And they were, despite their own political opinions. They sat in a courtroom and listened to the evidence day after day after day. And based on that evidence, they unanimously voted to convict. We should all be grateful for their service because it proves why America is the greatest country in the world, and that without our rule of law, we have nothing. The same rule of law that will protect you guys, you Trump supporters, when and if you need it, no matter what you believe or who you support. You should know that you can count on your fellow Americans should they serve on a jury in a case that involves you. You can count on them to do the right thing by you. So in the days and weeks and months following this verdict and any other judicial defeat Trump may face, please keep those things in mind. Because if you truly are patriots, if you truly love our democracy, you must also truly love, respect, and appreciate our rule of law and the Constitution, which protects us all. Yesterday, the system worked. The rule of law was upheld. Donald Trump is a criminal, and that was proven through evidence and a decision by a jury of his peers. And they most certainly didn't come for you. They came for him. Period. End of story. All right, let's get to Jennifer Rodgers. She is a lecturer in law at Columbia Law School, an adjunct professor of clinical law at the NYU School of Law, and a legal analyst for CNN. She teaches, writes, and speaks about government ethics, public corruption, sports corruption, and criminal law issues. Between 2000 and 2013, Jennifer worked at the United States Attorney's Office for the Southern District of New York, where she served in numerous capacities, including as a Deputy Chief Appellate Attorney, the Chief of the Organized Crime Unit, and a Chief of the General Crimes Unit. She serves on the Board of Directors for the New York City Bar Association. Jennifer, welcome back into the back room.
Thanks for having me.
So before we get into the trial and the verdict, I know how I feel and how millions of people have felt these past several months. The whole Trump thing, the trial itself in particular, is so exhausting. Every day you wake up, it's such a big part of your life. You as a CNN legal analyst and also all of your peers, obviously this trial takes a toll on you guys mentally and perhaps even physically on some level. You've been so invested in this case. So I'm curious as to what you're personally feeling this historic morning after.
Yeah, well, like you said, it is exhausting. They've been, covering it like crazy with all of us. I'm relieved. I'm glad that it's over. I'm relieved that it was a conviction. I don't know what the future holds as far as the impact this will have and, all of that stuff that's really more political than legal. But I think that the justice system acquitted itself very well.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm kind of, I'm proud of it in a way, that the judge and the jury did their jobs well and that the jury reached the verdict that I think was the right verdict.
Were you surprised on any level by that verdict? I know everybody was talking about a hung jury, a mistrial, or he might not be found guilty on all 34 counts.
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't say I was surprised, but I wouldn't have been surprised by a different verdict. I mean, there was a possibility that they would have split the counts and found some of the 34 guilty and some of the 34 not guilty. So that wouldn't have surprised me either. And, a hung jury wouldn't have surprised me. An overall acquittal would have surprised me. But otherwise, it was just kind of who knows what's going to happen. But with 34 counts and ways to differentiate among them, juries often bargain. Mm-hmm. And so I would not at all have been surprised to see them kind of split it up in some way that allowed everyone in the jury room to feel that they had prevailed on some of it, even though the juries likely think that really makes a difference in terms of sentencing if you don't convict him on all the counts, but it really doesn't. And this jury actually, with a civil litigator on the jury, they may have known that. I don't know.
As a former prosecutor, watching this case over these past 6 or so weeks, was there a moment where you thought he could be acquitted?
I mean, I thought it was very unlikely that there would be an acquittal. But, you never know. I mean, and you really don't know what happens when they get into that room. And I will say about this jury, it was an unusually well-educated jury. I mean, you had the two lawyers, you had other jurors with master's degrees and even a doctorate, and they were almost all professionals. And so, that means at least if conventional wisdom holds, right, that they're pretty confident about what they know. And so, I don't know. I mean, you could have seen if some of them decided that Michael Cohen could not be trusted and they literally were going to throw out everything that he said, which they could have done. You could have seen some strong personalities arguing for acquittal and it swing that way. But I thought it was unlikely. There was enough evidence that, to me, I thought the worst case scenario, if you were kind of a prosecution-minded person, was for a hung jury, because I really don't know that it would have been tried again if that was the result.
And I had seen somewhere that two of the jurors had said that they get their news from Fox and even from Truth Social. That's pretty astounding and a really good sign of how the system can work and should work, and in this case did work, that people were able to put aside perhaps even very strong personal political feelings and look at this case objectively and judge the evidence on its own merit.
Yeah, there was one juror in particular, juror number 2, who had said that he is on Truth Social and follows Trump on Truth Social. And that's also the juror that reporters were saying, as they spoke with folks in Trump's orbit, that they really liked that juror, that as they were kind of watching the jury react to things that were happening during the trial, and I don't mean big reactions, but, a nod here or there, or kind of perking up at certain testimony and so on, that they felt that that juror was in their camp. And so, it's all reading tea leaves, of course. And in the end, that juror convicted on every count along with the rest of them. But, that's the sort of thing that when you don't have any other information to go on, makes you either hopeful or nervous, right? If you see a juror who seems to be kind of leaning one way or the other. But yeah, that's the jury system. People come in with biases that they're supposed to leave at the door, but we're all human. And you just have to hope that when they get the judge's instructions and then get back there and start to speak with their fellow jurors about what everybody thinks of the evidence, that they keep an open mind and are open to being persuaded.
And in terms of the reading of tea leaves, when you were a prosecutor, I'm sure you did a whole boatload of that. You have nothing but time, so you're trying to look at that stuff. How often are you correct when you see a tea leaf and you think you've read it the right way or the way you want?
I guess it depends on the person. If you have a long enough trial, you can watch them for long enough, although, you never want to stare at them. You're always kind of getting side glances at the jury, right? You don't want to freak them out by just staring at them all the time. But you can kind of get a sense, I think, with a lot of people. But, then it depends on the person. Some people are just really good at kind of hiding what they're thinking. But I had a very long trial, a 3-month racketeering trial, where we had a juror who seemed to really be with us. We loved that guy. He was always nodding and, smiling. And then when the defense was doing stuff, he was kind of, scowling. And we thought, this is our guy. We love this guy. And of course, we don't know, because when you get a conviction, which we did in that case, prosecutors don't talk to the jury. Once you hear that they've convicted, you want no part of learning about anything that they've been doing back in that room, because it can only spell trouble for you if something untoward has happened. So we don't know kind of where he shook out. I mean, they did convict on most of the stuff, although we lost the most serious predicate, which was an attempted murder. So I don't know where he ended up. But, you do definitely think that you kind of have a read on things. I don't know. Who knows? I mean, I've had acquittals where, I wasn't certain, but I thought it was okay. And then all 12 of them didn't like it. So, who knows?
I find the whole behind the scenes thing fascinating. So is that really what takes place? Like the prosecution team and the defense, they're all just sitting around like going, oh my, juror number 9. Wow, did you see the expression? Like, is that just happening all the time?
Certainly during the trial, until it's all done, you have a lot to do, right? But when you're waiting for a verdict, yeah, you don't have much to do. I mean, in one trial, this trial I was just talking about, the really long one, they were out for a few days. So we had all this time on our hands. We ended up mocking up some joke flyer and sending it to one of the defense lawyers just to be funny. I mean, you really are just like reaching for things to keep you occupied because, you just don't have the mental bandwidth to do something taxing, right? Like read a book or anything.
Right.
So you just kind of have to, I don't know, you sit around and you snack and you just kind of find mindless things. Nowadays, you would just get on your phone and whatever, but this was back in the dark ages before there was TikTok and all these mindless things to do. So you would just kind of sit around and make jokes and speculate about the jury.
Yeah. Was this a short deliberation, in your opinion?
This was 12 hours about. I think that's about right. I mean, the Friday verdict is a powerful thing. The Friday after lunch, pressure not to come back after the weekend is a real thing. So I expected a Friday verdict. But 12 hours for a case like this where it was a little bit complicated legally, the way that they enhanced the misdemeanor into a felony, but not overly complicated. And the facts, frankly, weren't that complicated. So I think 12 hours is ample time. I mean, it's certainly enough time that you're not going to have some argument that they didn't do their job or anything like that. And so, I think 12 hours is definitely a reasonable amount of time. They could have come back Friday. If it got to the end of Friday and there was no verdict and I was the prosecutor, I would have been quite nervous.
When and if jurors start speaking out publicly, what would you be most interested in learning about their specific process in this trial?
Yeah, well, I want to know everything, right? Because I've never been on a jury and it's all just fascinating. But, I'd want to know kind of how they felt at the beginning, whether they took an initial vote, how if some folks weren't sure or were in the acquittal camp, how they kind of came around, negotiated with one another. I am curious about, there's a lot of criticism about how this legally was structured and that it was confusing and that they didn't have to be unanimous on what the unlawful means of the enhancing offense was. And so I do wonder whether they struggled with that at all, in what level of detail they went through, what the actual crimes were and the elements and each kind of step of the way. Or whether they were just kind of overall, hey, do we think he's guilty or not? Does anyone need convincing? What evidence should we ask for? Okay, let's do that. And didn't really get into the minutia that we have all kind of slaved over in such great detail. And, to be fair, the appellate courts will, of course, address when it comes up on appeal, whether all of that was properly structured. But, sometimes we think something like that is such a big deal. And in theory, it could even be overturned on the basis that the jury was asked to be, unanimous on some things and not others and all of this. And the jury may not have even focused on that at all, right? So, I would be curious about that part of it for sure.
And so what happens next for Trump, like literally today or tomorrow? Does he have to show up somewhere? Like, there's like a probation meeting or something that's taking place? Like what?
Yeah, he'll be interviewed by a probation officer. So the court takes submissions, of course, from both sides, but they also get a report from the probation office, which is kind of an arm of the court and is meant to be a more neutral view. And so they interview the defendant. So he'll have to sit down with his lawyer.
He has to go in for that?
He does. Yeah. Unless I don't know during COVID if they established other procedures, Zoom or something, but usually, you'd have to go in, sit down. And the probation officer will interview you in depth about all, everything, your whole life and a lot of stuff that impacts supervision things like who is in your store, who do you spend time with, what do you do? Because if there is probation at any point, either instead of prison or after prison, then the supervision, of course, is pretty intrusive and heavy, and they want to know who you're spending time with, what you're doing, all this information about your job and your family and so on. And then the probation officer will write up a report for the court and make a recommendation about sentencing. And of course, the parties also will recommend, and Trump will recommend no sentence, of course, and no probation, probably. He'll probably want an unconditional release. And what the prosecutors want is an interesting question. I really do wonder what they will recommend. There are lots of options. It's not just go to state prison or nothing at all, right? You can have probation with different levels of conditions. You can have what they call intermittent incarceration, which would be like you could even go in for weekends. You could have home confinement. There's all sorts of things that they could do. You could impose a fine. I think they're probably going to sort through as they think about their submission, obviously figure out what they want to recommend. And then the judge has to take all of that and make what is a really tough decision given who the defendant is.
So what is the likelihood that Trump will see the inside of a prison cell in this case?
I think it's low. Just the technical logistics of sending him to state prison with his Secret Service protection and his notoriety, it's hard to fathom how it would even work, which I think is why Mershon was just so tied up in knots about the violations of the gag order, right? So I think it's very unlikely that he will get a true prison sentence. I think it's reasonably likely that he'll get something short of that is still quite confining, like home confinement. I don't even think probably intermittent confinement, but maybe home confinement. He also could get community service, actually. I looked up, he could get 400 hours of community service for this Class E felony. So
just imagine what that would be like, huh?
On the side of the highway with a stick thing, picking up the trash.
Or at a soup kitchen. Oh my God.
He's a charity-minded guy, right? I'm sure he would love that.
But here's the thing with Trump. We know that he lies. We know that he's defiant. We know that he breaks the law. Does anyone really think he'd be with a stick on the side of a highway, or that he would show up, longer than an hour? I mean, it just seems like with the gag orders, he continues to violate. The threat of jail is there, and he just pushes it right up to the edge. But even if he gets some kind of leniency, don't you think ultimately it's just going to be one of those things where he just ends up in prison because he violated the terms?
Well, it's interesting because he definitely gets away with whatever he can. He pushes it far. But in the gag order, he actually stopped. I mean, initially he was violating. He violated, there was one chunk of violations, 7 or something, right? Or 8 or whatever. And then before the judge ruled on those, he had another group of violations. But then once the judge ruled on the first one and basically said to him, listen, this is the way it's going to be. I don't want to put you in prison, but I got to do what I got to do. He stopped. And so I think, yes, he'll do the bare minimum that he can do without getting himself in trouble he doesn't want to be in. But, this showed that when he really has to, he can control his behavior. I mean, it's crazy that we say that about the man who wants to be president again, but he can control his behavior when it is in his self-interest to do so. And so, I don't anticipate seeing him with the trash stick on the side of the road, but I think he will do what he needs to do to comply with whatever the sentence is, if it means, not going to prison.
So a lot does ride on whether he walks into that court on July 11th and shows remorse, right? And also, he has relentlessly attacked the judge, the one person whose hands his fate lies in. It's almost impossible to imagine him standing there and saying, Your Honor, I'm sorry. I accept what I've done, blah, blah, blah. And he's going to be defiant. I mean, he's speaking today. I can almost script out what the speech is going to be, how corrupt and conflicted the judge is, how awful the system is. So even if the judge wants to be lenient, isn't Trump going to be his own worst enemy in that regard?
Well, he will not be remorseful. I think we all know that he will not accept responsibility in any way or say he's sorry or anything like that for sure. He doesn't attack the judge to his face. Listen, of course the judge is human, but he also is very even-keeled. He knows he's been under attack. He's going to fashion a sentence that will stand up on appeal. And, I can't see the judge kind of trying to take it out on him because he's been so awful to the judge and just generally because that doesn't seem like who Judge Mershon is. He's a professional and, he knows that this will all be reviewed. And Trump's his own worst enemy. But again, he pushes it just to where it makes sense, right, to stop. So he won't express remorse, and the judge can and will take that into account. But I think still the judge is going to stop short of actual prison because, the other thing that we haven't talked about is that this sort of offense rarely results in prison for first-time offenders, too. I mean, one of Trump's, things that he keeps saying is, I'm being treated differently, two-tiered system of justice, blah, blah, blah. And if he got a 4-year prison sentence, that would be true, that he would be being treated differently. So, 77-year-old man, first-time offender, nonviolent offense, this sort of offense rarely justified prison time for others. So, I just don't think we'll get it here.
You said something really interesting just now, that the judge will sort of have his eye on a potential appeal in how he issues a sentence. Is there a scenario where he may want to do A, think that A is justified and should happen, but B would look better if there's an appeal? Because that's kind of weird to me if that's the process that goes down.
Well, judges hate to lose on appeal. They hate to be overturned. So I think it happens all the time that a judge thinks, at least in their own head, maybe not for public consumption, but man, I would love to throw the book at this guy. I'd love to give him the max or whatever, but, you don't want to be overturned. So you do something else, or man, I would love to let this evidence in, but it's not going to look good for appeal. So I think judges are always thinking about appeal. I think that's very, very common, but it's good. It's part of the system. It's what keeps them in check, right? I mean, you wouldn't want judges because they're not kept in check by things like the statutory maximum and that, because that's so, that just gives so much leeway. So you really want them to be tempered by the notion that if they do something out of bounds, that they'll get overturned for it. I mean, to talk about another case, like the Judge Cannon case, right? The classified documents case down in Florida. She got flapped down so viciously by the 11th Circuit on the special master case. I don't know that that's keeping her in line or not, but you do want your judges to be kept in line by what could possibly happen on appeal. And I think they all think about that a lot.
Sure, but I'm more asking, what if it's inbounds? I think the sentence here could be 4 years per count with a maximum of 20, right? So maximum of 20. What if he gave him 3 years? That doesn't seem out of bounds, right? That's prison time, but would something like that be grounds for appeal? Would that be considered out of bounds? And so my point is, would he not even give 3 years because there may be more of a concern about the appeal and perhaps even his own record? Like you say, judges hate to lose on appeal. I would just hope none of that really happens and that everyone, Trump and the bus driver on the street, the lawyer, whoever, gets what they deserve under the law, and maybe it may not be the maximum, but something perhaps.
Yeah, but then you get back to this fact that virtually no one in his situation would get a prison sentence for this, right? Now, other people would likely not have been attacking the justice system throughout and would express some remorse.
Or even attacking the judge's daughter, that.
Yeah, I mean, you can do that, by the way, without giving up your appeal arguments, right? You don't have to say, I did it, I'm guilty, please be nice in sentencing me. You can say kind of, I regret what's happened. I'm sorry for my family and anyone who's been hurt. I mean, you don't have to say, I'm guilty, I hereby admit that none of my appeal arguments are valid, and still express some remorse, which of course I wouldn't expect anything at all from Trump, and quite the opposite. But, I think the judge, what is quote unquote in bounds here has to also be what is consistent with what happens in other cases. Not that it couldn't stand up on appeal if it's within, what the statute indicates. But I think there are enough legal issues here that are going to be front and center on appeal. I don't think the judge would want the sentence to be questionable in any way. And again, you also have to, again, it's different from the bus driver, and maybe that's a problem, but it is a fact that he has Secret Service protection and he's running for president. And he is someone who, unlike the bus driver, might be a particular target in prison. And so, there are things that you do have to think about if you're the judge.
You're raising some really interesting points again, like, for example, even the muted remorse that Trump could show in court, I think would have devastating political impact to him. His whole foundation is about being tough and strong, and it's rigged. So it seems like even the slightest little slightest little contrition on his part would just shatter his whole foundation politically. What could he say that would still give him the ability to walk out of there without the egg on his face that he would likely have politically?
No, he can't. I mean, it's not just the actual political, like he's running for office and he has to say this to get the votes. It's been his whole thing, his whole life, right? Never admit anything. Never surrender anything. And that's just how he rolls. And it's worked pretty well for him to avoid accountability his whole life. And so, there's no way he changes that up now. I just can't see it, both because he's running and because that's just who he is. I mean, the reports last night that were coming in from people close to him that he was, just furious, livid, like just couldn't believe it. I mean, I believe it because that's just the way he is. But really, he's furious because finally a jury said to him, we find you guilty of something. All this evidence came in and we believe that you did it. He knows what he did. I mean, he's furious because someone actually had the gumption to say, we find you guilty. Like, I don't know. I can see being disappointed and sad and worried and, all of these other things. But the adjective was that he's just livid. And I just thought, like, that's so Trumpian,
Well, he's a sociopath. I mean, that's, I think, the thing we all struggle with is because we always try to measure him against other presidents and other norms. I mean, how many of us have ever encountered in our lives someone like that, who is either a sociopath or, my God, pretty damn close? And so they don't think like us. They don't respond like us, So of course, he's going to be like, my God, how could you have done this to me? And be furious, Yeah,
I was just going to say that all these people surrounding him who have gone down for him, right? Who have criminal convictions or, other really negative consequences from having covered for him or done things for him. I mean, Michael Cohen, he is furious that Michael Cohen is testifying against him and has cooperated against him and all of this stuff. And Michael Cohen, who did everything for him, who would have taken a bullet for him. And then when he gets his apartment and so on searched by the FBI, Trump throws him over the side, tries to influence him not to cooperate. And then Trump is just attacking him just relentlessly. And he's furious at Michael Cohen. It's like, Michael Cohen has the right to be furious at you. It's just.
But that's what Trump does.
Really
like Congressman Bob Good showed up at court last week, literally to support Trump, to sit by him in court. And like the next day, Trump endorsed his opponent in this primary. Like that's what you get. And this is the thing. I mean, I know politics, you're legal, not politics. But that's the thing I never understand politically, how person after person will throw their souls and their integrity and their reputations and careers away for someone who will throw them under the bus in a nanosecond. And yet they keep doing it. Like you look at, Mitch McConnell and Ted Cruz and Lindsey Graham, all these people, Marco Rubio have come out, Byron Daniels, they're still lining up to support him. And he will throw every one of them under the bus eventually. And yet they never learn.
Yeah. Well, one other interesting point to bring it back to the legal, one of the standard probation conditions for felons is that you cannot associate with other felons, right? You're not allowed to talk. So does that mean he can't hang out with Steve Bannon and
right? Oh my God,
Roger
that's so
Stone
interesting.
And Michael Flynn and Paul Manafort and all of the people who are felons, many of whom are felons because they were doing stuff for Trump or to cover up for Trump, and now they're felons. And a pardon doesn't erase that felon status for purposes of this if the probation officer wants to impose that condition. So it'd be interesting to see whether he's allowed to hang out with some of those cronies now that they're all in the felon club together.
That's really interesting. So does he have even a remotely viable case for appeal? And like, what would the strongest grounds for that appeal be, in your opinion?
So there's a bunch of grounds. Many of them, I think, are easily disposed of. So there are a couple of categories, the things that happened before the trial, right? So there are motions made like for a change of venue to move it out of Manhattan, for example. And then motions around the indictment and the way it was charged. And then there are the things that happened at the trial, evidentiary rulings, the jury instructions, and so on. So I think the strongest arguments are around the issues of the way that the crime was charged. The defense claims that they didn't have enough notice because it wasn't clearly specified what the enhancing crime was. So you have the falsification of business records, and then it's enhanced from a misdemeanor into a felony because that falsification crime was done to commit or conceal another crime, which is a New York State election law crime. And they didn't specify that at the outset in the indictment. Now, the DA's office says that they don't have to legally, that there's no problem with that, but that's going to be one of the issues on appeal. And then the enhancing crime, which says it's a crime to conspire to influence an election by unlawful means, they didn't really specify their legal theory as to what those unlawful means were until the trial itself. And the judge ended up instructing the jury on what the unlawful means allegedly were. And there were 3 ways the DA's office said that there were unlawful means that were used. But all of that came out very late in the process. And so there's an argument that the defense didn't have enough notice of that, and that's a constitutional flaw, that he didn't have enough notice about what he was charged with. I think that is the strongest argument that they have, because the way this was charged with the election law enhancing the falsification crime, and then one of the unlawful means being actually a federal campaign finance law violation, that combination of charging has not happened before, apparently. And so we'll have to see when the appellate court gets it whether they have a problem with that, either on the notice side or just on whether that federal crime can be used in that way. Anytime something hasn't been done before and you haven't seen it litigated on appeal and have an appellate court say, yep, that works for us, then you wonder, whether it will or it won't work. So I think that's the strongest thing. I think the rest of it, including last night, Todd Blanche was complaining in his interview with Caitlin Collins about, Stormy Daniels' testimony and how outrageously prejudicial it was. Like, none of those things are going to fly. They brought up most of those things on themselves. But that legal question, I think, is the strongest case they have on appeal, and we'll see how it goes.
I know this is a loaded question, but do you think they could win on appeal?
I think that the DA's office and Judge Marchand are very good and very smart and have thought this through carefully. And they're much more familiar than I am with New York State law. So I give the edge to them. I think likely no, that it won't be overturned. So yeah, I think that's likely what happens. But you never know. I didn't think Harvey Weinstein was going to be overturned either.
Right. And what is the timeline for appeal? When do they have to file that?
They have, I think, I want to say they have a month to file, but you have longer for your briefs, and then you just have to file a notice of appeal, and then the briefs come a little later, and then the real delay comes with the courts. I mean, there's no timeline for when the court has to finish the appeal, and he will, even if the judge sentenced him to a prison sentence, which, as we discussed, I don't think will happen, that he would be out pending appeal. So he wouldn't have to go in to serve a sentence. So, I mean, it could take a year for the initial appeal. And then if Trump's practice is any guide at all, he will keep appealing, right, as much as he can. So if he loses at the intermediate court, the appellate division, then you can expect an appeal to New York's highest court which is called the Court of Appeals. I think he'll keep going until he can't go anymore.
Mm-hmm. In your opinion, what were the defense's biggest mistakes, if there was one or two in particular?
I think that they made a mistake by focusing too much on Stormy Daniels and on that whole side of it, and trying to attack whether it happened in the first place, getting into the weeds about the encounter. I think all of that was a big mistake because it really focused on just the steaminess and the grossness of his behavior in a way that was unnecessary. I mean, why they didn't just stand up and say, it doesn't even matter. Like, none of this even matters. What happened? The fact is, she came forward. She said she was going to say something, and then they alleged that this money was paid. It doesn't even matter. Mm-hmm. But they kind of dragged us all through that, which I think was a mistake. And then, just focusing too much on the election piece of it and not enough on what their strongest argument was, which is that Donald Trump didn't know anything about these payments to Michael Cohen. He didn't know how this money was reimbursed. He's not in the weeds like that. He's president of the United States. He's too busy. And to the extent that Alan Weisselberg and Michael Cohen cooked up some scheme to get him his money back, Trump wasn't involved. And Michael Cohen says he was, but he's a liar and you can't believe him. Alan Weisselberg is nowhere to be found. And so you have to acquit. And if they had stayed laser focused on that, and not tried to claim that it wasn't about the election and, he's a liar about all this other stuff. Because once you say that some things are true or not true, that, the jury's like, no, we know that is true. Like, it was so overwhelming that all of that hush money stuff was paid because of the election. I mean, that proof really was just so overpowering that their insistence that it wasn't and their attempts to try to undercut that, I think, harms their credibility in other places. So if I were the defense, I think I just would have stayed very laser focused on that one question. Mm-hmm. And I don't know that they would have won, but I think it would have been a closer call if they had done that. And they may have been ordered by their client, to do that. This may have been a Trump special where he just insisted that they go all out, attacking Daniels, attacking Cohen on everything, and try to destroy them. And that's not the best way to win this case. And what I don't know, and no one knows, is how much of that was driven by Trump himself insisting that that's how it be done. And his lawyers saying, no, we should go this other way, or whether, they agreed with that strategy.
Well, it may at times be ugly or frustrating, or it feels like it moves too slowly, but the system worked, didn't it?
It did. It did. I mean, this is how you want it to work. The judge was great. The jury did their job, and it worked. I mean, we'll see what happens in sentencing and appeal, but yeah, I mean, I'm proud of it. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I agree with that. Me too. Jennifer, thank you so much. This has been very enlightening, and I look forward to our next chat.
Thanks, Andy.
Take care. This episode of The Back Room was edited and produced by me, Andy Ostroy. It was co-edited and co-produced by Maddie Rosenberg, and co-produced by Jen Hammoud. Our theme song was composed by Andrew Hollander, and our logo was designed by Cricket Langell. And special thanks to Patricia Wind. Please take a moment to rate and review the podcast, and also follow or subscribe. Until next time, keep your eyes on Washington, Hollywood, and your own backyards, and have a great week.